I've seen this categorized on Twitter as, just being another example of the system, taking wealth from young people and giving it to older people. And I think that's fair.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
And today we're talking about whether Canada should be giving more tax dollars to seniors regardless of their wealth.
But before we begin, the time has come to reach out to the Missing Middle audience to ask for your help. If you listen to the Costs of Having a Child in Canada episode, you know that my co-host Cara is having a baby, and we have to start the process of replacing her for the duration of her mat leave.
And while I know that I'm completely irreplaceable, I'm definitely going to be away for a number of months, and we're hoping there's someone in our audience who has what it takes to be Mike's co-host.
Now, we'll be releasing more details soon about what the role entails, but what we need is a freelancer, and yes, millennials, we pay in dollars, not exposure, to be my co-host. You need to be passionate, articulate, and knowledgeable about the issues impacting young middle-class residents who are becoming increasingly rare in our cities.
You also have to be curious and interested in how the world works, and brave enough to tell Mike when he's wrong, even though he's a fancy economist who calls himself Dr. Moffatt.
So if that sounds like you or someone you know, please tell them to send us a resume with a 1-minute video of why they think they'd be good for this role to missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
So if you've spoken to me at all in the last few weeks, you've definitely heard me complain about the Bloc Québécois' demands that the government increase old age security for people aged 65 to 75, and that's at a cost of over $3 billion a year to the federal government. And I'm pretty mad that all of the parties, except for the Liberals, although there were a few Liberals too, voted in favor of this motion. And then I read a poll from Nanos that said that more than 3/4 of Canadians support increasing old age security. And I started to think, well, maybe people don't get the issue here because, like, on its own, giving money to seniors sounds great. Like, yes, of course, that sounds great. Let's give more money to people who have lived in this country and worked in this country. And we often have this idea of seniors who are, on a fixed income, and life can be quite expensive and inflation's been bad. So I get it. But there's so much more to the story that I think people aren't totally getting. So I want to start here. Let's just start with very basic. Mike, what is old age security?
The federal government has 3 big cash support programs for Canada's seniors. The first is Canada's pension plan, which works like a traditional pension that during your working life, you pay into it. And then when you retire, you get money back based on how much you paid into it. The other 2, the old age security system and the twin guaranteed income supplement benefit, are more like basic income programs for seniors, with the OAS largely benefiting middle-class seniors and the GIS top-up aimed more at the poor.
My understanding is that when it comes to CPP, people pay in their whole lives. They always, they're working, and their whole life, they take a portion of their paycheck and put money into it. So it kind of makes sense to me that after they retire, that they are able to access that because that money's been invested with their money. So that makes a lot of sense to me, but that's not the case at all with old age security, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That old age security is paid out of current revenue. So it's paid the same way that we pay for the military or hospitals or schools or anything else. That there's not some kind of separate fund that have been accruing over the years. So, it's simply not true. You'll often hear this in Twitter that, people go, well, I paid into this program my entire life. So, of course I should get more. But people really haven't. It's coming out of current revenue, and it's paid by all taxpayers. You, me, the 19-year-old who's working in a coffee shop. We're all paying into it. Not just seniors.
Why does old age security even exist in the first place if we have the Canada Pension Plan?
Well, a lot of it is due to the fact that not everybody works and not everybody pays into the Canada Pension Plan over their life. So, we've had problems in Canadian history with high levels of poverty for seniors. The Canadian Museum of History has a really great summary on this that we'll link to in the show notes. But over time, the old age security system going back to the 50s, the guaranteed income supplement that was introduced in the late 60s was designed to address seniors' poverty. If you go back to newspaper articles in the 60s, there was this big thing about seniors having to eat cat food because they couldn't afford human food. And over time, sort of governments responded to that high level of poverty and said, okay, you know what? We've got to create these programs to get, seniors the levels of support they need and deserve.
I get that there's the idea of really poor seniors, and I know we all have that image in our head, but this money goes to people who make a ton of money. Like, you can get the full amount at $90,000 on an individual income or $180,000 on a household income. And that's just before clawback starts. So it can actually go much, much higher than that. I don't understand how people think of that as impoverished and needing tax handouts, basically.
Yeah, so that's right. Like a lot of high income seniors can collect OAS. And people are confused about that. There's essentially two different distinct clawbacks in the OAS program. The first is that OAS income is considered taxable income. So, you have to pay income tax on it. So some of that is collected back by federal, not just the federal, but provincial governments as well in the form of income tax. But you're right that there's also this kind of second clawback in the system where, over a certain threshold, the monthly checks start to get reduced. We'll put a link in the show notes that shows all of these kind of cutoff points. But I also think it's important to remember that all of those, that the taxation points, the cutoff point, that's all based on taxable income. And we should recognize that there are a lot of seniors who could have significant wealth, but don't have high taxable incomes. So you think of somebody who lives in a $2 million home, perhaps they have a lot of money sitting in a TFSA or something like that. They might not have a high taxable income for tax purposes, but they got a lot of money and they got a lot of wealth. So we have to understand that as well. So the upshot is that, the OAS is not particularly well targeted to reduce seniors' poverty. It's more of a middle class program for seniors. Now, increasing the OAS is going to lift some seniors out of poverty who are currently in poverty. So it's not that it doesn't have any effect, but it's not a very well targeted program if poverty reduction is what you're trying to accomplish, because it does go to a lot of middle class and sometimes even higher income seniors.
But is that why the government is thinking of increasing old age security? Because poverty is particularly bad for some seniors, and this is a way to target it?
Turns out, no. And we have good data on this from the 2021 census. Again, another thing I'll post in the show notes. Professor Robson at Carleton, one of Canada's great economists, did a great job at crunching the numbers in a piece for IRPP. We'll link to that as well. But you add it all together. When we look at the data, it shows that seniors actually have the lowest rate of poverty by age in this country. Any guess on who has the highest rate of poverty?
Who?
People between the ages of 19 and 26, the young, urban, and, well, not so middle class. Those are the folks who are struggling most according to the poverty statistics, not seniors.
It's so frustrating. Like, I know that there's a lot of people who talk about how hard it is to tax wealth, but we should at least consider wealth when it comes to how to give out tax dollars. Because when I think about all the money that's going to people in Canada, the people who need it are people who can't afford basic shelter. When I think about someone who's on a low income, maybe, or a fixed income, but they have a paid off home, like, their costs are so low compared to people who are, in that 19 to 26 age range, who are trying to get a bedroom apartment and looking at like $2,500 a month apartments. Like, their costs are so much higher. So then I'm thinking, why are we taxing people to help people who don't have these high expenses? Why is it even something that the government doesn't even seem to think about calculating that into it at all? Like, I get it's hard, but there must be a way to consider cost of living in these targeted kind of, or not so targeted, in what should be targeted handouts? Is there no way to do that well?
So on the income side, kind of cost of living, general cost of living side, that absolutely you could target to different cost of living in different cities. They could have increased GIS instead of OAS. On the wealth side, it is exceptionally difficult. Governments have talked about doing this for years for a variety of different reasons, not just OAS, but a variety of different wealth taxes and things like that. And the short answer is it's exceptionally difficult for the CRA to measure wealth when there's no transaction that has taken place. They simply don't have the data. And they don't really have a convenient way of getting the data. And I think governments have just concluded, instead of spending billions and billions of dollars of trying to set up these systems, they're just better off making these programs a little bit less targeted, and they kind of save money that way by not having to create these large, complicated tax structures.
You pointed out on Twitter that like a huge portion of the government's budget goes to seniors. How much is it?
It's absolutely massive. So OAS, along with the GIS top up, and there's a spousal benefit as well. They were an over $70 billion line item just last year. By 2029, it's expected to exceed over $100 billion every single year just because of population aging. Like, we're just adding more seniors and seniors. That doesn't include the extra $3 billion if this proposal passes. So overall, $100 billion would be about 1/6 of the federal budget. And that doesn't even count CPP. That's just OIS and GIS, taking up one out of every $6 that the federal government spends. Now, Kara, I tend to look at everything through an economic lens. And in the economic lens, this proposal that the bloc put out, it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, we have so many problems in this country, and we have a federal government that's trying to balance the books. So, like, why spend $3 billion on a seniors anti-poverty strategy that doesn't actually really address poverty in the first place? You're a journalist. You're more attuned to these things than I am. So, noting that this motion, it's non-binding, it doesn't change anything, doesn't change policy. First of all, like, why do you think the bloc introduced it? And secondly, like, why do you think it had support from people from all parties, including 5 liberals?
Well, I was surprised at first that the conservatives were supporting it, considering that they're talking about we needing to spend less tax dollars. And they keep talking about how we need to focus on young people. And so seeing them support this, I was like, oh, that's very annoying. But also, I think that they probably are trying to make an election happen. So, I mean, it looks good for them when they're like, look, all these parties are really, we have the majority here and we want this to happen. And the liberals, look, you don't have a mandate. You're such a minority here, and you're still not allowing us to do the things we want to do that the majority of MPs want to do. But I think there's also part two, which is pandering to seniors. I think that a lot of seniors vote, and they know that. They know they're more reliable. And I know that that's something that a lot of them will be thinking about as they're hoping to get into an election. I don't think people realize how much money goes to seniors and how little money goes to everyone else, especially people who are, starting off on their careers now. They have huge expenses. It's so difficult to live in a lot of the cities, and the governments don't seem to want to be supporting that as much. Even when you look at a big program like the childcare program, like, the amount of money that goes towards that compares to what goes towards like old age security, it's like not even close. Like, old age security plus GIS, like, you put them together and they massively outweigh how much is going towards this childcare program. So I just think people need to look at it as well, and realize that when they are increasing this kind of money for seniors, it comes at an opportunity cost for what else they could be doing with those dollars. I had read something that said when you are going to increase it across the board like this, it'll be about $16 billion. And if you targeted people who actually need it, it would be under $1 billion. So then I think, okay, if we had $15 billion of tax dollars to spend on anything to improve society, is this where we'd put it? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Again, noting that that's $16 billion over 5 years. So, $3 billion a year, that's still a lot of money. And I agree. Like I've seen this categorized on Twitter as, just being another example of the system, taking wealth from young people and giving it to older people. And I think that's fair. I think I absolutely, I tend to not like this kind of generational warfare, but I think that's a fair comparison because ultimately, who's going to pay for this? It's young workers. It's those young workers who can't afford a home, have relatively high incomes, but can't really afford to spend it just because our housing market has become so broke. So absolutely, I do think there is a form of generational subsidy going on here. And, the cynic in me says that, governments would do something like this, that, while it would be unpopular with young voters, it would be popular with seniors. And, as you say, seniors are more likely to vote. So they go, okay, well, for every young person we annoy, we make two seniors happy. And, that's a trade-off worth making. But you showed me that the Nanos polling, and we'll link to that in the show notes. But it suggests that this move may be popular across Canadian society, that this isn't necessarily kind of a generational warfare thing, but rather this could get supported by folks of all ages. So, my question to you is, why is that?
People don't think about the opportunity cost of where else the money can go, and people don't understand it entirely. So I'm hoping anyone listening to this comes away with realizing that it is younger people paying for it. It's a transfer of wealth, which we already have a lot of that in society when you consider housing, who owns the housing, who is paying for it. Even when you buy your first home, like I think of it as you're just handing a bunch of money to someone who bought it a long time ago. We have a lot of this. We don't need more of it, and I don't think people are seeing it that way. And I hope if you're listening to this that you start to recognize that this is exactly what's happening, and like maybe tell other young people in your life that that's what's happening, and get them to actually get upset about it so they can make a difference and get politicians to start paying attention to them. That would be the important lesson out of this, I hope.
Yeah, I hope so too. We have to remember this is a non-binding motion, so it doesn't
Well, it's a
actually
bill.
change
It's
policy.
an actual bill. It's just that the Liberals need to introduce it because it has a big financial cost to it, and they're not going to do that. So it's not going anywhere, but it is a real bill.
Yeah, exactly. Opposition MPs cannot, make budgetary decisions. So, while MPs supported this, while there was a vote in the House, the vote passed. That doesn't actually make it the law of the land, right? The only way it becomes law of the land is if it gets introduced in a budget or a fall economic statement. And it doesn't look like the Liberals are going to do that.
But if you're millennials or Gen Z, like listen to that virtue signaling and understand that what they're saying about what's important to them and who is important to them.
I'm with you. I hope this gets more attention by younger folks and they start asking some hard questions because, $100 billion a year is a lot. I think the last thing we need to see this go to is $103 billion a year.
Thanks so much for watching and listening. And thanks as always to our producer, Meredith Martin.
If you have any thoughts or questions about intergenerational fairness, please send us an email at missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.